Hello, everyone. Ben here, obviously. Just wanted to give a quick update about the book. So I'm recording this on Monday, October 30th. The interview you're about to hear with Dr. Christopher Chabris, it's really a conversation more than an interview about my book. That was recorded about 10 days ago, so just want to give a quick update about the availability and a couple other things. Number one, my book is now shipping from New in Chess in Europe. It's also available immediately on their ebook reader. So no matter where you are in the world, if you want to read it right away, you can get it that way. And read it on the New in Chess app. Number two, the Amazon page here in the US still says November 15th. I'm told there's a good chance it will be available sooner. So you can keep checking and I'll update on social media if it does get released sooner. And whenever it's available on Amazon, I believe it will also be available on Kindle. I mentioned with Chris, I'm selling signed copies in the US available immediately for $40, including shipping and tax. Obviously, that would not be the most cost-effective way to get the book, and I appreciate any method in which you purchase the book. Number three is we had to edit around some audio issues for this interview. We got rid of most of it, but around 45 minutes in, you'll hear some background noise. It goes away after about 10 minutes, so please hang in there. My apologies for the inconvenience. I didn't hear the noise when we were recording, so was unable to address it then. Last but not least, one thing I forgot to mention at the end of the interview with Chris when he asked me if there's anything else I wanted to say, and I do say this in the acknowledgments of the book, but this is really a community effort, this book. I'm really just the messenger, so just wanted to thank everyone that's part of the chess community, especially people who have appeared as adult improvers, as trainers, as authors, so many people who've contributed to what goes into the book. As you guys will eventually see, there's so many people quoted because so many people whose insights I've drawn from. So just wanted to thank you all for your contributions and for engaging in any way with the pod. So I won't ramble any longer, at least not until you hear my next ramble in the conversation with Dr. Chabris. So let's get you to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. Listeners, the day is finally here. I think that when you hear this, my book will actually be out. And joining me to discuss that, we have longtime friend of the pod, Dr. Christopher Chabris, who I will bring in a minute, but did want to tie up a few loose ends first. Number one, wanted to give a shout out, as always, to Chessable in my book, Perpetual Chess Improvement. Of course, there's a chapter about different chess learning tools, which covers Chessable in addition to stuff like LiChess studies and ChessBase and the chess playing sites and these things called books, and the list goes on. And in the Chessable chapter, I, of course, list some of my favorites, also some of my favorite authors. Some of my favorite authors include IM Christoph Selecki, Erwin Lamy does great opening courses, especially for more advanced players, and Andres Toth, of course, a lot of you know, has the amazing content, especially for novice to intermediate players. So be sure to check out my favorites from chessable.com. But let's introduce our, I guess you could call him guest host, because I took the reins here at the beginning, but he is one of the only people outside of the New in Chess company that has read my book so far. So he is ready to discuss it. There will probably be mild spoilers, but it's not a novel. There's really not that much to give away. I guess if you're super dedicated, you could come back to this later. But more, it will help you discern if you are interested. I think regular listeners will be well familiar with Dr. Chabris' background. He is an award-winning author and cognitive scientist and USCF master and frequent guest and collaborator here on the podcast. He is quoted many times in my book, as we will discuss. So let's welcome Chris back to the pod. Chris, thanks for helping out here.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to actually pretend that I have a podcast for the next, 45 minutes or something like that by commandeering yours. And I really, I wanted to start by, well, first of all, congratulating you on writing a book and getting it published, especially by a really good chess publisher, New in Chess, one of, the best chess publishers there is. They've been around for a long time. They put out all kinds of great quality stuff. Why did they put this out? I wonder. No, that was just a joke. I think it really, it's a really great book. I've read every word of it. So first of all, congratulations. Second of all,
thank you. And
yeah.
Go ahead.
Second of all, I wanted to say a few words about the book first, and then I thought I'd ask you a few things about it.
Okay, let me just go through a few more sort of general announcements about the book, because I get a lot of questions about what formats it'll be available in, signed books, stuff like that. So very excited to dive deep into the book. But first, I just want to go through a few things. So it's supposed to be available October 31st, which is also when this podcast comes out. Now, I'm recording this in advance, so if you hear it and it's not there, don't worry, it'll be there soon. Just keep checking. It will be available in Kindle, New in Chess Reader, Forward Chess. It's also going to be available on audiobook. Now, of course, there's some chess diagrams in there, which we can't replicate for audiobook, but as Chris will be able to attest later, the book is about 80% prose. So you're missing a few chess diagrams. You'll also get a supplemental PDF with those diagrams. And what you get in return for the missing diagrams is you'll get to hear some of the quotes, and there are many, in the guest voices. So we cut to the guest voices many times within the audiobook. The other thing is, I just wanted to say, the audiobook is kind of like a pilot program from NIC, from New in Chess. Obviously, there aren't that many chess audiobooks out there. So if you're an audiobook connoisseur, then and you want there to be more of them, then that is a good way to check it out as well. Although you will have to wait about a month. They're still doing all of the editing from my stuttering and stammering through the audiobook that hopefully will be removed. I also wanted to, on the topic of signed books, I'll be doing a couple signings. I'll be doing one in the beloved Marshall Chess Club in New York City. That one's on November 11th, 7 p.m. And I'll be doing one not far from where I live in Moorestown, New Jersey, which is basically suburban Philly, South New Jersey. And that one's at the Moorestown Public Library, November 16th. So I'll put links to those if anyone listening happens to be local to either of those places. Hopefully do some signings down the road at national type chess events, but nothing currently planned in that regard. And I'll also be selling signed books on the Perpetual Chess website. Unfortunately, shipping outside the U.S. is prohibitively expensive. So for now, they're only available in the U.S. They will be $40 for a signed book. I can either sign it generically, or you can custom tell me what to write up to 300 characters. And as long as it's safe for work, as they say, I will write whatever you want on that book. And if there's any other information that I get after this records, I'll add it along with all the stuff I just mentioned to the show description. So just wanted to get all that out of the way. Thank you for bearing with me, Chris. And now let's kick it back to you for the actual discussion.
Great. So I'm excited that you have an audiobook. And in fact, I would say it's about 96% words. It's not you don't lose 20%, you lose maybe 4%, because there are a bunch of diagrams, but they don't. It's a unique book in the sense that it has chess moves and diagrams in, but it could work just as well without them. They definitely add to the book, but you don't really lose much by losing them. And of course, with the PDF, people can look at them and so on. So it's no big deal on the audio version. Let me start by. I just wanted to start by sort of saying some things about what I liked about the book before asking you about it. First, it's got a great title because Perpetual Chess Improvement, I think, is to my mind, is part of the feeling of chess and why we like chess, because we can always get better. And most of us are always trying in some way to get better, or at least always hoping to get better. And it's sort of a perpetual process of improving. Even the title sort of captures a lot of the spirit of why the game is so fascinating. Did you have that in mind, sort of deliberately when you picked it?
You came up with the title, right?
No, I didn't. I didn't know that, but I know I came up with some titles for sequels, which we could talk about later, but I didn't know I came up with a title. Well, thank you. Where's my royalties?
No, we were discussing on Facebook Messenger when I was telling you about it. And as we'll probably discuss, this book was in the brainstorming phase for far too long. And when I told you it, you just rattled off like 6 titles off the top of your head. And one of them was Perpetual Chess Improvement. And you had like different subtitles from them. So I think we did end up altering the subtitle, but you get full credit for the title.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned that I was quoted a couple of times in the book. Apparently the title is a quote of me also, although exactly. I didn't realize.
Don't sue me.
Well, it's a great title. Yeah, I won't require any royalties because you let me do this interview instead. First of all, the title is great. Second of all, the length is great. And a lot of people are concerned about the length of books. I find I'm increasingly concerned about the length because I don't feel like I'm ever going to get through a 500-page book, but 240 pages you can get through. And that leads me to the next thing I noticed about it, which is one of the most readable chess books I've ever encountered. And therefore, it's going to be a very listenable chess book also, because you could easily listen to this, while you're exercising, driving, walking, whatever you're doing. I wouldn't say it's as gripping as a novel or a detective story, but it's much more gripping than 99.9% of the rest of the chess literature, except maybe sort of memoirs and Sasanko, tributes to great Soviet players and that kind of stuff, and so on. So congratulations on that. The other thing I think it does is, it did for me at least, is it really summarizes the collective wisdom of dozens of coaches, trainers, experts, adult improvers, other people about what are the sort of key ingredients to improving at chess, and also what are the things to avoid and what are the things to be careful with. And I don't think there's any other book that really takes sort of this kind of collective intelligence approach to the problem. Like, there's tons of books where, one author gives their opinion, maybe quotes a couple other people. But this is really sort of like a synthesis of like what you've heard over like hundreds and hundreds of conversations. And that really makes it unique.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, obviously, I feel privileged to be in the position to be able to provide that context. I mean, that's the real beauty of my station. And I had this transcription site called Trint that basically cataloged all of my interviews, and so I was able to search by keyword. So I can rely on my faulty memory to some extent, but also if I'm looking for exposition on a certain topic, it's AI generated, so it's not perfect, especially when it comes to chess terminology and names, but 80 to 90% accurate. So I was able to sort of, if I'm looking for a quote, or if I remember the contours of what someone said, but don't remember exactly, or maybe I don't remember who said something exactly, but I know that it was said, it was super helpful with all that stuff. Chris, but before we go any deeper, and I really appreciate your kind words, I do feel like we should let listeners know a little bit about the structure of the book, just basically what the 4 parts are, plus conclusion are.
Yeah, I was about to get to that. So I think the book has an excellent structure and design, and it's divided into 4 parts, as you mentioned. The first part is the 4 pillars of chess improvement, which is literally 4 things. So there's 4 chapters in the first section. We'll get to what they are maybe in a little bit. The second part is other aspects of chess that you can work on. And then we have a bunch more, topics under there. Then comes working on your game away from the board. And I think the last part is tools of improvement, where you sort of talk about different particular things you can use, like books and software and websites and videos and so on, and sort of advice on which of those to use, like which are your favorites, which are recommended a lot by people who've been interviewed, and then how to get the most out of them. And then there's some sort of final thoughts and so on. So again, kind of like, I think, a fairly unique structure in that it surveys, so many of these topics. And each of these chapters is not too long. Like, each of the chapters is maybe 10 pages at most, I would say. So you can easily read a chapter, think about it, come back to read another chapter the next day, or move around from like topic to topic, right, as your interest. But I read it straight through because, of course, well, A, I wanted to read it, but B, I wasn't really looking for anything in particular. I just sort of wanted to see what the perpetual chess like experience has taught you.
Yeah. I mean, and I did try to keep things short. Of course, there's going to be like little pieces where I have to sort of repeat myself, because if I'm talking about spaced repetition, it's going to come up in different parts of the book. And the tools of improvement chapter in particular, I think, is designed so that, any casual who picks up the book at Barnes & Noble will then sort of feel like they can wrap their head around where to go with these sites. So I think maybe some of the more advanced players will be like, all right, come on, Ben, like I know what a LiChess study is. So there's going to be a little bit of that for in any book, but that's sort of the price you pay if you're trying to address a wide audience.
So what do you mean? This is a sort of a question that comes up all the time on your show. What do you think is the ideal or optimal audience for this book?
Well, definitely chess coaches, for one thing. I mean, there's obviously, like, it's a testament to the growth of chess that there's so many chess coaches now. I mean, 15 years ago, I feel like there were maybe 200 in the world. And now I'm just spitballing, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's 5,000-10,000 people making their living doing that. So for them, whether they're stronger than me or not, I think it hopefully will provide a window into sort of some of the thought processes and questions that amateurs grapple with in terms of like, if you're just an adult chess consumer, I think if you're, if you're brand new to chess, if you're an online player rated below, say 800, some of the concepts might be over your head. But I would say the core audience I'm addressing is 1,000 to 2,000. And then people over 2,000, I think trainers in particular would be interested.
I'm over 2,000. And one of the things that I found interesting about it was, or useful, and in fact, what I would say is inspirational, is there are a lot of stories about the various, quote, adult improvers that you've had on the show. And even some who are not necessarily adult improvers, but who tell stories about their own, career and so on, some of which, come up. And I found it very inspirational. It's like a concentrated dose of inspiration hearing about, guys who became IMs in their 50s, or people who have been, basically studying steadily and gaining, hundreds of rating points and so on. Obviously, it's never that simple, but it's always good to see, as I think maybe someone in the book commented, that at least it's possible, like as long as you have one or two examples, at least it's possible that you could achieve, those goals. So I'm not giving up on IM quite yet, because I saw in the book, I was reminded of a couple of people who got there like relatively, who were busy people and, relatively late in their careers. So I'm not giving up yet, partly as a result of this, as a result of what's in the book.
Glad to hear it. Although, just for listeners, I do try to be balanced. There's a lot of chess products on the marketplace. Buy this and your rating will go up 500 points. I definitely, in the book, tell people repeatedly, you're going to devote a lot of hours to your life to studying this game, and you might not get any better. So that's something I've certainly had to grapple with. So,
that's like the perpetual part, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, you don't sugarcoat it. No, absolutely. That's a good point. It wasn't in my notes of what to comment on, but you definitely, I think, present a very realistic viewpoint of what's involved, and it's not simple. And anyone who's offering a course that says it's going to take you from beginner to whatever, like, that's puffery, and you're not afraid to, to say that. And I think, one of the very first chapter, I think, really in a way makes this point, because the first chapter is about how the most important thing to do to improve is to play. And there's no magic formula to improving that doesn't involve playing a lot. It's like, it's not that different from, soccer or something. Imagine you just studied soccer and practiced in your driveway. Like, how good could you possibly get doing that, right? You need to actually go and play and, and face serious opposition and try to figure out, what you could do better next time. And so I think the beginning especially takes a very realistic, look at what, at what matters. And it sounds like, that's another, this sort of gets back a little bit to my point that is definitely something that so many people mention when you talk to serious coaches, right? But it's not necessarily in sort of like the lower quality advice that people give, or it's not certainly in like the marketing of products, which definitely don't say, buy our product, but instead of using it, go play a whole bunch of tournament games and analyze them. Nobody's ever going to say that. But you sort of tell us, what you've heard from people who really are serious about this.
Yeah. And hopefully people, hopefully you enjoy tournaments. I mean, as I say somewhere in the book, I mean, it's actually a wonderful thing that the best thing to get better at chess is actually the thing that brought you in the first place. It's not like, like I quote Dr. Courtney Fry saying, obviously, I think he's a radiologist. He was an adult improver guest. And he has a quote where he's saying, like, he thinks there's something wrong with the mindset where he's approaching chess as a hobby. And he enjoys learning more about opening structures. And he says, I really enjoy studying opening structures, but instead I'm just going to grind endgames for the next 5 hours. And he doesn't enjoy endgames. So a lot of it you have to calibrate to your ambition. If you're young and ambitious, or if you have personal reasons that you're willing to do whatever it takes to gain a lot of rating, then by all means, go for it. But if you have a finite amount of time and there are certain aspects of chess you like and certain aspects you don't like, and you're not a chess professional, then in a lot of people's cases, luckily they enjoy playing. But more importantly, whatever it is you enjoy, I'm in favor of doing.
Yeah, no, that's a message that definitely comes through as well. And I I think among other guests, have talked about it's better to do something you like than just not do anything at all, because someone tells you need to really master this thing before you can do that thing. But if you like the second thing more than the first thing, it's better to do that than to do neither of them, because you can't stand the first one, So, and this is a nice thing about this book, I think, also is it's sort of by presenting the collective current wisdom of things. It sort of punctures some of those old cliches that we used to hear over and over again. And some people still repeat, like, because Capablanca said you have to do X, we must all do X. But Capablanca said it, 100 years ago, and he was one of the biggest geniuses and prodigies in chess history. So why should we expect him to know, like, what a 30-year-old person needs to do, in order to become better at chess, or to go from 1,000 to 1,500 or whatever they're trying to do? It's really kind of silly in retrospect that these sort of cliche advice from 100 plus years ago still has so much currency, and you don't really talk about any of that stuff in this book. So we can get that elsewhere. Here in the book, we have what we understand today about improvement.
Yeah, well, the thing is, and this is another sort of subcurrent of the book, is just people used to have so few resources, So, if you go to the library and there's only one chess book there and you don't know anything about chess, that book is going to teach you a lot, and you're going to think it's amazing because there's so much that you didn't know. But now in the modern climate, we've just learned so much, and there's infinite resources. So we don't, there was certainly a sort of, I can't think of the word, but a lot of received wisdom that just got passed on because the original people used these resources. But I do think we're slow, and a lot of them were great for their time. It's just that, humans continue to innovate. So there's incredible tools now.
Yeah. And speaking of Dr. Fry, one thing I noticed about the book is there's a very wide variety of voices in the book. So you said in the audiobook you can actually hear the voices, which of course you can also hear on the
about
podcast.
10 times. There's not like a million quotes, but about 10 times we cut to the original speakers.
Yeah, but there's probably 100 quotes in the book from different guests, maybe more. Some of them somewhat extensive. I was a little bit alarmed to see that I was, quoted extensively a couple of times. But I think it's good because we don't just hear from you, much as we love to. We hear from a lot of different people, and I think that sort of increases the value of the advice because you're not getting like some single authority figure who's telling you what to do and and so on. And it nonetheless, though, your voice comes through very clearly. Like, so 90% of the book, of course, is your words, not guests' words. And I think your personality and your the way that we as listeners and audience members of the podcast know you really comes across quite well in the book, which is good. It often is. I always find when I write myself, it's sort of hard to keep a natural voice sometimes. And I think you did an excellent job of that in the book.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Were you deliberately trying to do that? Or were you just sort of writing? Are you just a savant when it comes to writing books? You just wrote the words down and they were perfect the first time?
I've always written in a fairly personal style, but there were definitely moments where I sort of have to decide, like, are you going to go for it or are you not? Like I have this stupid, paraphrasing of a Bob Dylan song, about paraphrasing this old song, you're going to serve somebody about how your rating is going to peak no matter who you are. And I could either put that in or not. And people might think it's terrible or not. But at the end of the day, you want a different product on the marketplace. So in those sort of fringe cases, I kind of had to force myself to put the more personal things in. But I definitely lean that way generally.
I think of the voice of the book, you may be surprised to hear this, but it reminded me more than anyone else of Jonathan Rowson's books, in that he often uses these epigraphs and quotes and references to things outside of chess. But of course, his books are more abstract and philosophical and even spiritual. Yours is much more down to earth and practical. That's the intention. But we do get the sense of there's like a conversation with the author going on rather than just being lectured to or something like that.
Right. Well, as you know, I'm a big fan of his, and I did include him in the acknowledgments for a reason. He's definitely had outsized influence on my chess thinking.
I want to ask you about one specific thing in the book that personally fascinates me, and then maybe talk a little bit about like how you wrote the book and sort of how you think about it and so on. But the specific thing I wanted to ask about was suddenly there were a couple of pages sort of detailing Levy Rozman, also known as Gotham Chess's, sort of psychic struggles with trying to come back to competitive chess and become a grandmaster. And I did watch a lot of his recap videos that he was posting during that time. I found them fascinating, that he would go and play in an international tournament. His game would end. He'd like race back to his apartment or his house, make a video on the game that just ended, then race back to the tournament for the next round or something like that. And you really felt like you were there all along. And why did you spend so much time? You know, maybe 2 pages, right, of the entire book, but you have sort of an extended interlude about his, you know, about that story. So why did you put that in the book, and what did you think about it?
Yeah, so that is in a chapter called Chasing Titles. And basically the idea is how we all as chess players become borderline obsessed in some cases with status in chess. And that no matter who we are, we want our status to be greater. And, you know, I compare it to the hedonic treadmill, which is basically this idea in the study of economics that basically no matter your personal income level, you want it to be higher. You say it's not enough. And there's this phenomenon at work in chess, and it's very applicable to chess. I mean, but I found Levy to be particularly interesting because he has everything, you know? Like, I mean, he's not a grandmaster, but he is the most successful chess professional in the world. You know, he's not the most successful player in the world, but in terms of like fame and most likely income, I mean, okay, you know, maybe there's a couple people making more money than him, but certainly he's making plenty of money. He's unbelievably successful, and he was so tortured when he was trying to get the grandmaster title. It's not like he was enjoying it. So it was just fascinating to me that even when you get to his level of both chess ability, he's amazing, you know, and notoriety, you still end up the same place as everyone else. And I also liked that, I mean, I had remembered reading his various tweets in addition to watching his videos while that was going on. So, I mean, obviously, I liked the fact that I could embed a few of his amusing tweets that really sort of cut to the core of what we all have to deal with if we are trying to increase our status in chess.
Yeah, it definitely. I think his tweets and his the whole story sort of captured a lot of the struggle, you know, the struggle and the psychological struggle of chess. Like I was in a tournament not long ago myself, and I think I was playing some 13-year-old, you know, who was rated 1900 something, and I felt like every move he made for a while I hadn't thought of. And he was making them very quickly. And I felt like my position was, you know, getting worse. Of course, the computer told me in the end, actually, my position was not getting worse and everything was okay. But it felt that way. And at one point during that game, I did think, why am I even doing this? Yeah. But I don't have like, you know, the most popular, you know, podcast and you know, YouTube channel in the world and so on. But I do have other things I could be doing besides, you know, playing in chess tournaments and so on. And those thoughts definitely come, but he was very public about it. And maybe the fact that he has been so successful, you know, in every other part of chess, he's also was a coach. He was a very successful coach, as far as I know, for a long time before I get into the streaming and everything. Maybe that makes him want to sort of complete the collection, you know, with the GM title, or maybe sort of achieve a level of success in chess that's sort of commensurate with his success, his level of success over the board that's commensurate with his level of success off the board, you know, with the in media and training and all of that.
Yeah, but there was also an element from what I could tell, because I interviewed him about that time, around that time, in addition to watching his videos. It's like, I'll do anything to become a grandmaster except hard work. And that's something that I can relate to. Like, I want to get better at chess, but when push comes to shove, I'm not going to spend 2.5 hours a day studying chess. And I think with Levy, you know, I interviewed his coach, Grandmaster Wojciech Miranda. Like, he wouldn't sacrifice his content for the sake of chess, you know, and, you know, God knows how much money every single video of his is worth. So I certainly understand it, and he, you know, so many professional opportunities, and he wasn't willing to, like, you know, take time off from recording the videos or shut down for a week to prepare. And the reality is, you know, a lot of people to become GMs, like if you think of Kevin Go Mei Wang, who I quote in the book extensively, like, you have to become a monk, if you're working on it. And he was kind of doing the opposite. So shout out to Levy. As has been said many times, the chess world is better that he's making content and didn't get the title than if he had, shut down everything else and chased the title. But I did just find it fascinating. He kind of wanted it both ways. And that's something that I think a lot of us have to struggle with, since we don't have infinite time.
Yeah. Yeah. So somehow Hikaru Nakamura has, reached
Yeah,
new heights of his career, despite
Yeah.
streaming and making recaps right afterwards in the candidates tournament and so on. He's maybe the only guy who's been able to completely put it together.
And at the highest level, no less. Yeah,
Yes.
he's just from another planet.
Yes.
It's incredible.
Yes, exactly. And his success, continues to grow amazingly. Well, let's get back. Okay, so let's get back to the book. So, like I said, I think it's great. I think it's fills a unique niche in the chess literature too. There's really no book like this that covers these topics in this way. I think it's extremely readable, and everyone should read it. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of like the process of writing it and so on, if that's okay.
Sure, you're a writer after all.
Well, that's right. And so I'm going to combine like two of my questions into one. Part A is, why did you write a book? And part B is, was there any point in time during this whole process when you asked yourself, why am I writing this book? How can I get out of this? Like, why did I agree to do this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've always enjoyed writing, and I did think it would be good for my own ability to sort of synthesize all that's been said on the podcast. I mean, it's got to be around 500 hours in total of Perpetual chess. So it's just such a volume. I mean, there've been one or two cases, I won't say who, but there've been one or two cases where there was like a person that I couldn't remember if I interviewed. And like, that's a little bit alarming, that's an hour of our lives that we're spending together, like very focused, and obviously I'm doing hours of preparation. So I really wanted to have a mechanism that forced me to look back and synthesize what I learned. And in terms of like, was there a moment where I like hated the fact that I'd done it? So the way that this project came about was Ramel from New in Chess Books had approached me about writing a book, and we had a conversation. And I sort of decided I would start writing a little bit, but I also didn't like sign anything with New in Chess and just kind of put it on the back burner. But meanwhile, and I would spend some weeks I would spend an hour, some weeks I would spend 3 hours, some weeks I would spend none. But slowly the material was accumulating, and I was still doing a little bit, and it was preventing me from taking on other projects. Because like, if someone asked me about, like, I finally have a chessable course coming out, for example, I would say, well, I want to figure out what I'm doing with this book first. So it reached a point where I just felt like, okay, I need to like have a deadline. So that was when I reached back out to New in Chess and had a deadline. So I would say it was right before I signed a deal to actually write the book. That was probably the point of max torture, because I was just like, what am I doing with this? But once I had a clear objective and a deadline, I was able to sort of pace myself, and it got a little crazy towards finishing, but not like insane or anything.
So it sounds like you were in an enviable position of a respected publisher contacted you and said, you should really write a book, and here's the book, and here's the book you should write. So you didn't have to go through the torture.
A few ideas.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so you didn't have to go through as much torture of spending, years working on the idea and the proposal and hoping to find a publisher and all of that. You had a pretty clear process, and I guess a pretty clear idea, although you said there were some alternatives that you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this isn't the only podcast related. It was going to be related to the podcast, but as you've highlighted yourself in our correspondence, there's other themes I could have and still could hit on from the podcast, but Ramel and I, when we talked, coalesced around this one pretty quickly. And there are a lot of fun stories I could share that aren't chess improvement related. But as I said, in terms of like wrestling to the ground what I think myself, this to me felt the most urgent.
Was there anything surprising or especially challenging that happened while you were working on it?
Well, the main thing is just the relentless editing, the unbelievable amount of typos that show up in a draft, and no matter how many times you read it, you still come across them. So, and I think this is true of a lot of writers. I enjoy the sort of tinkering and rewording process, but the process of actually sitting down and creating something new, I don't enjoy as much. So there was a push and pull there as well.
So are you happy with the final product? Any regrets about some stuff you didn't manage to get in there that you wished you could have, or something maybe that you forgot, like those interviews you mentioned that you wish was in there? What's your feeling at the end of the whole journey?
It's not too bad at the moment, but like as we record this, I just interviewed Grandmaster Davron Koljasevich. It will have come out a week before this pod, and so getting ready to interview him, I was reviewing, and obviously, like I'd read his book, How to Study Chess on Your Own, but sometimes in working on this book, I would reread a specific transcript of an interview because I would just think, so-and-so was really insightful. I should, searching for a certain word might help, but I should also just sort of see the whole contours of everything they said. And I didn't do that with Davron when I was writing my book, but I did do it before our interview yesterday. And I was thinking like, man, I really should have done this before I wrote the book. Like this quote could have gone there. This quote could have gone there. And obviously as time goes on, and I think back on the, many other podcasts, I'm sure there are people who had brilliant insights that I just totally forgot about. So there's always going to be an element of that, but I'm reasonably happy with how it turned out.
With all your interviews, the huge volume of content and so on, I imagine there's enough to do another book like this. If you could come up with a different structure, you can't just sort of have the same structure, but different quotes, but you could do another, even just on the improvement, the improvement topic, not to even think about other other things.
Yeah, well, I was going to turn it back on you. Were there any sort of like improvement topics, like broad topics that you were surprised that you were just like, I'm surprised that's not in there?
No, as one of the hardest things that we have to do that we can do is figure out what's not in front of us. So when you put a nice book in front of us with a great organization and all these topics, most people don't start thinking of what's not here, what's missing, right? So that's there are some of those people, and sometimes they're really annoying when they're book reviewers or reviewers, because they really wish you had written a different book or a book about a different topic, and then you get the review of, he didn't write about this, he didn't write about that, and so on. I don't think you're going to get that, I don't think you're going to get that, run into that problem here. I'm sure there are some topics I could think of, but they're probably sort of more in depth and in detail oriented than sort of you wanted for your audience. So I didn't really have any sense that something was missing. On the contrary, I sort of felt like there was a lot packed in there, but also you don't really, I would say you don't dive too deeply on any one particular thing. Which is good. Maybe you felt like you did, or maybe other people would feel like there's some deep, sections. But to me, it felt like it moves along, pretty snappily, to the next thing. And there's some insights on each topic, and then we go on to, then we go on to the next one. And by the way, structurally, I thought you sort of did a couple of nice things. I'm curious whether they were part of the plan all along. One is to sort of, you have this bullet point summary at the end of each chapter, which is good for sort of helping people remember, the key points before they go on to the next one. And the other is sort of the introduction. The book is broken into 4 big sections, as we mentioned, and you have sort of like a little introductory page in each section, which kind of summarizes what the chapters are going to be about, and then each chapter itself has these bullet points at the end. So there's a lot of scaffolding in the way the book is designed, to help people process and remember it. Was that your idea from the outset, or how did that feature sort of come about?
Definitely not from the bullet points were there from the outset. I mean, I've read enough books on my own and articles where I definitely appreciate it myself when people synthesize things for me. I don't discourage readers from forming their own syntheses, but I do find that helpful. But in terms of the organization and the scaffolding, that kind of came together in the last few months of writing it. And I didn't write the book in order. It was sort of like, I just had various ideas. And then as I started to think about them, I mean, I did have sort of the 4 pillars of chess improvement, which they're not a secret. I will reveal that they are playing competitive games or serious online games, reviewing them, solving puzzles. And then the 4th one, which you might not think of automatically, is having a community. So I did have that pretty early, but the other sections came together later. And the section about the tools of chess improvement, that was all Ramelt from New in Chess. That was his idea. When I sent them a proposed outline, he suggested that should be in there too.
I was going to get to the first part shortly, because as you mentioned, even yourself, the 4 pillars of chess improvement, I was impressed that you've interviewed all these people and you've sort of come to the conclusion, here are the 4 most important things. And they're not the 4 most important things I think that any one person would necessarily tell you. They're sort of the 4 most important things according to the collective. They're the things that, get mentioned the most often and sort of seem the most logical, I suppose. But there are some things that weren't in there, which other people have said is the most important thing. And the number 1 is the end game. That's the biggest cliche, is that the end game is the most important thing. That goes back to that Capablanca, the Capablanca story that I mentioned. And no disrespect to Capablanca, an amazing endgame player, a genius, and so on. And every one of us could stand to get better at the endgame. But you don't have that as one of the 4 most important things. And I thought that was interesting. I'm not saying I disagree with it. I actually think I agree with it, although I'm trying to work on my endgame myself. But then the surprising one was the community part, which I thought was really interesting. I hadn't thought of that before, but it's sort of one of those ideas that as soon as you hear about it, you realize how important it is, because engaging in something all by yourself is, not a good psychological recipe for success. Some people succeed at it, but it is, I think, more of a recipe for failure than for success. And it got me thinking that, as you mentioned elsewhere in the book, the post-mortem has kind of died, largely, or at least it's on life support now, which is kind of a funny, ironic pun. The post-mortem is on life support or something.
Right.
But it almost never happens. I'm always shocked when someone asks me if they want to go over the game. But on the other hand, so that aspect of the community is sort of taken away, where there'd be a lot of people in the Skittles room talking about the games and so on. But on the other hand, we have the new social media aspect, which sort of has replaced it. So you've got massive communities of people who are sort of supporting each other. Well, massive, I don't know, but large communities of people who are supporting each other online. How important do you think that is, relative to the other, pillars that you've got there? You made it number 4. And obviously, you can have the support of a lot of people, but if you don't learn your tactics, you're not going to be good at chess. But you sort of certainly rank it before learning the end game and, and all that kind of stuff and so on. So tell me a little bit more about how you came to the conclusion that was one of the most important things for improvement.
Well, to me, what it comes down to is that if you're going to try to get better at chess, shout out to Neil Bruce, you have to have a long view. You have to think of it in terms of like a 10-year plan. And if you're thinking in terms of a 10-year plan and you're thinking, this is just going to be my little side hobby that I don't talk to my wife about, and I don't have any friends that engage in it with me, and I'm just going to, by sheer force of will, propel forward for all of this time and spend many hours a day, it's just not sustainable. It's just not doable. So that was kind of the realization. And in thinking about, my own chess development, I mean, when I started Perpetual Chess, some listeners might know broadly my air quotes career arc, but basically, I mean, I graduated from a good university and worked in the corporate world for a couple years, worked as a paralegal, almost went to law school, instead decided to teach chess at Chess in the Schools, a nonprofit in New York, for a year while I was applying to law school, and just realized I liked that life much better. That was my last sort of moment in the corporate rat race. And then I taught chess for a couple years, but also other chess player friends and I, as you know, Chris, all got into poker at the same time. Slowly that became more serious to the extent where I was making more money doing it than I was teaching chess. So I quit, ended up playing successfully for 7 years, got tired of it, and you couldn't play online anymore. So I needed to look for different career paths, and I tried my luck trading in the financial markets. That didn't work out as well. So eventually I realized I needed another another career. And the whole time I was playing poker, when you're a successful poker player, people will ask you, like, what if it goes away? They'll dance around it, ask you in various ways, what if it all ends tomorrow? And in the back of my mind all along, I thought I could go back to the chess world and be happy. So that's what I ultimately did around 2015, and then started the podcast in 2016. But all along, what I was realizing, and the point of this whole story, is that some of my best friends in the world were chess players all along, just from having grown up that way. So that when I did come back to the chess world and I did ultimately decide to start a podcast, I still had friends like Greg and Jen Shahade and Mike Klein and Jan Gustafsson. And, I've known Ben Feingold for 20 years. So I was able to sort of re-enter that network. So that community, obviously, in my special case, is what has provided the most value. But I definitely observe it in the online communities like Chess Dojo and in the chess.com forums, and the list goes on. I definitely observe that. The chess attracts kindred spirits. So I think once you do, even if you're coming to it later, not necessarily in your formative years, when you have a passion for chess, you always have something to talk about.
It's like golf for nerds.
Yeah, it's like golf for nerds. I heard a funny story. I was listening to this interview with Colin Cowherd, who's like a sports media guy. He was saying that he has, he's building out a team for his media company or whatever. And he was saying that he has one rule when he's hiring people, which is that they can't play golf, because he says if they play golf, they're going to be totally obsessed with it, and they're not going to do a good job at their job, because it just takes over your life to the extent where you're not able to perform at a high enough level. Now, I apologize to any golf enthusiasts listening, but I'll also admit that when I heard that, I thought of chess players too. I thought maybe on the one hand, chess players, especially accomplished chess players, like, they're showing that they have a certain analytical and decision-making skill, but on the other, there may be a degree of obsession that could or could not be counterproductive to your main job.
Well, I think I have had a similar experience to you, which is a lot of my best friends in the past and even today were people from chess. People I met in the chess club in college, for example. There are thousands of students, but there's not that many in the chess club, and the ones you meet there, I still know a lot of them, and most of them are out of chess now. Like, they maybe play a little bit online, just for fun. But when I tell them, oh, I played in this tournament and, I did this, that, and the other thing, I feel like I get a lot of encouragement and positive feedback. And they don't give me like training advice or anything like that, but it's sort of fun to have that community. Here's a thing maybe that you might resonate with you if you feel the same way I do. You mentioned, I think you reached about 22 something, maybe in college or after college or something like that. Do you ever look back and say, boy, if I had just pulled out a couple of tactics books and played 50 tournament games a year for a couple of years, I could have made FM, or I could have been so much stronger? Because a ton of people go through this experience of they get to their 20s, and then the whole thing goes in the freezer, for a couple of decades or something like that. Maybe you're teaching chess, but you're not working on your own game, or you're just doing something completely different, and so on. Do you have any regrets about sort of not having, gone at it harder in your 20s?
I do in the abstract. I've definitely had that exact sort of internal monologue, but, people in their 20s have a lot to figure out, both a professional, personal level, chess level. So it's easy to think I should have just spent, 10, 15 hours a week studying chess and playing frequently when my mind was more plastic and I could gain more rating. But you can't pick and choose necessarily. There might have been unforeseen externalities from making those choices. So that's what I always remind myself.
Yeah, no, certainly. And the nice thing about chess is it's always there.
I think it's sort of baked into the cake in chess that there will be periods of energy and entropy. I mean, it just demands so much that it's rare that someone can just be full throttle for, decades straight.
Yeah, even in the short run, you don't play a tournament for 2 months, you probably need to sort of get back into, there's probably, especially the older you get, you need to get back into the swing. Okay, well, let me ask the last question I have for you, and then we've got some Patreon questions and so on. So can I ask you, what's the next project now that you've finished this book? Are you going to do Perpetual Chess History, Perpetual Chess Enjoyment, any of those, or what's next?
Yeah. So as I've mentioned once or twice, I am working on a Chessable course. I'm still in relatively early stages, although it's on a much shorter timeline. I'm hoping to have it out by early next year. I don't want to say the exact topic, but I mean, it's around the general theme of tactics and designed for primarily people under 1200chess.com or so. So I'll see how that goes. To me, it's kind of like a bit of A/B testing, comparing it to the process of writing a book. And of course, for better or for worse, in the world that we live in, we have to take commercial considerations into our thought process in terms of evaluating what to do after that project. But I will say, I mean, I really enjoyed writing this. I have multiple other ideas for things to write. So we'll see how this is received. But I will say, if I were to write another book soon, my primary idea is not related to the podcast, although it is chess related. But I don't want to go into too many specifics. But that's kind of where I am.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll hear about it on Perpetual Chess when the time comes. All of these
yes.
things. Well, that's why you have a podcast, right? You have a platform.
Right, exactly.
You get to promote things. I don't think anyone's bothered by that. Okay, so you have a question for me.
The question is, Chris, do you strongly disagree with any of my conclusions?
No, I don't strongly disagree with any of your conclusions. If you were forced me to quibble with something, I think I would say I think that it's almost always overdone when people sort of appeal to neuroscience to explain how you should study chess. And you did an admirable job of restraint, I think, in that in that respect. But it's very tempting to sort of explain, how all the right decisions in life and all the right ways to learn and study and so on are all driven by some neuroscience that has to do with dopamine or serotonin or neuroplasticity or the frontal cortex and yada yada. And while that is all true in some way, I think it's not the right level of explanation really to think at. And in chess, the level of explanation we should have is sort of what's proven to work. Like if it was shown that something proven to work, sort of didn't have some obvious neuroscience explanation behind it, I would just stick with what's proven to work, and do that. And I wouldn't do something that someone claims is very neuroscience inspired unless there was some really solid evidence otherwise that it worked. And you mentioned A/B testing a minute ago when you were talking about your course. I would really wish people would start, bringing A/B testing, from the tech world and from the science world into developing training materials. Like, let's see which exercises actually do cause the most improvement, and it could be even at the micro level of individual puzzles and tactics and sequence of things and so on. And maybe I just guessed what you're doing for your course. You don't have to say anything, but that's the kind of science that really should be informing, educational materials, not neuroscience. There's the science of memory, cognitive psychology, testing, those are the sciences that really are the most relevant. So, but it's not a problem for your book because you don't go overboard in any of that stuff. That's just sort of a quibble.
Well, you did help me with that chapter, although not as much as I would have liked. I would like for you to have just written that chapter. So for listeners, what we're referring to is I did write a chapter called Deliberate Practice in Chess Study. And this is the chapter that I would say I felt the least qualified to write out of all of those in my book. I mean, I don't really have a science background, but I did, I'd read some books on the topic, some of them actually recommended by Chris. And for listeners who heard my interview with Dr. Anique de Bruin, it was sort of when I was in that rabbit hole, that was when I initially reached out to her about interviewing her, and I learned a lot. But Chris was definitely helpful in sort of, let's say, helping point me in the direction of sort of drawing from a wide base of information. And like you say, I mean, maybe I made too strict of conclusions, but you at least pointed me in the direction of broadening it a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that chapter. And by the way, I like that podcast very much with Dr. de Bruin, who sort of gives an update on this concept of deliberate practice, which is often cited as sort of like some kind of magical solution to getting better at things. When in fact, in retrospect, it seems almost obvious once you hear about it. You've got to practice in certain ways in order to get better. But it's really, you can't just sort of take that concept and then apply it, because there's all kinds of unanswered questions about what it counts as deliberate practice. Some people say it has to be inherently unenjoyable, which doesn't really seem to make too much sense. It almost seems to be deliberate torture, instead of deliberate practice at that time. So I thought it's fine in the book, and it's sort of like a more disputed academic concept, I think, than sometimes is realized, and when it's discussed in chess and other areas. So stick with what works.
That's very, very good advice, very practical advice. And that's good to hear, because as I hinted at in the book, but I felt like I might be a little over my skis when I was reading this Anders Ericsson paper and forming my own questions, I did feel like, some of it, as I mentioned with Dr. de Bruin, like some of it is about sort of the nature of talent and, nature versus nurture questions, which I think are interesting in the chess realm, but definitely were beyond the scope of what I was writing. But I definitely did feel like it was overly prescriptive. But on the other hand, there was a voice in my head saying, like, this guy is a legend in his field, and I'm, picking this up and reading it. Like, who am I to question what his conclusions are?
Well, I think it all came out fine. And I don't think anyone is going to read that chapter and be misled somehow, or their chess improvement is going to suffer, or anything like that. Is there anything else before we get to the Patreon questions that you want to make sure we talk about the book before the Patreon questions are a bit specific. So if there's sort of any general things you want to talk about before we get to those?
Not really. I guess I would harass listeners that if you buy the book and if you like it, the best thing you can do is write a positive review, especially on Amazon. Again, this is the world we live in. I didn't make it, but that's the way things work. But beyond that, I think I'm ready for the Patreon questions.
Okay, great. So, write a positive review, and you can write reviews on the audiobook too, on audible.com and various other places, and give stars and so on. I'm sure that'll help just as much. Okay, so first question is from, and as you know, Ben, people who are supporters of yours on Patreon get to send in questions and know the topics in advance.
Listen
and
to
so
you,
on.
What a pro. Yeah.
I've probably listened to the majority of those 500 episodes myself at some point, so I know the drill, and they get to send in questions in advance. And the first one is from David Ham. So David Ham asks about solitaire chess. I think before I read his question, I'll just say what I understand solitaire chess to be. Solitaire chess, which I think Gregory Kaidanov talked about maybe doing himself. Yep. And he just had an amazing result in the Qatar Masters tournament. He lost to Magnus Carlsen, but no shame in that. At age 60 or whatever he is, he's doing great. And solitaire chess, as far as I understand it, is you sort of get a game score, and you cover up the next move, and you try to guess what the next move is. And of course, it should be a game score for maybe a good player. So you're trying to figure out what a good player did in each of the positions sequentially, one by one. I think it's meant to sort of give you the experience of like an actual game with a continuing story through the game, as opposed to just a one-off position, find the right move, white to play and win, that kind of thing. And there are various different formats you could get points for guessing right moves. So it's sort of gamified and so on. So if I've got that right, David asks, I hear that solitaire chess is a key way to improve. Are there ways to do solitaire chess at certain levels to make the exercise more fruitful? For example, I've been doing solitaire chess via LiChess studies, per Ben's super helpful YouTube video. But I have started to wonder if doing the exercise with annotations could be helpful at my level. And he says he's around 1100 in rapid on chess.com. So what do you say to David?
Yeah, so this came up a bit in my interview with Grandmaster Koyasevich, which of course you haven't heard, Chris, because we recorded it yesterday, but it will have come out before this one. But basically, first of all, I want to say, like, it's great that David's doing solitaire chess, and I hope that he's enjoying it. And obviously, as Chris said, Grandmaster Kaidanov is a legend and, an amazing trainer in addition to being an amazing player. But there's no panacea in chess training. So if you try it and it doesn't work for you, that doesn't mean that because you heard him talk about it, that you have to do it. But I certainly appreciate that David is trying to find a way to make it work for him more. And I do think that at the 1100 level, you definitely want to have explanations for the moves you don't understand. So as Davorin and I talked about in the prior interview, I do think to work from a book like Logical Chess Move by Move or Instructive Chess Miniatures, any of Chernev's books really, in addition to logical chess move by move. Or if you're working with a coach, just when you don't understand a move, make a note, ask them about it. I mean, I know it's going to happen frequently where you don't understand the move. But if it wouldn't make sense, and my personal opinion, some trainers might disagree with this, is that it's more important to have the explanation available than just how strong the player is. Like if you're 1100 and you have a 1600 friend who can do it with their games and explain what they were thinking, like it would be better if you were getting lessons from, a grandmaster, but it's very valuable to hear the thoughts of a stronger player, especially after you've tried to figure it out for yourself.
I agree. I think another resource people might be able to use is, I think Grandmaster Daniel King had a series for a long time called something like maybe How Good Is Your Chess, but essentially it was sort of a solitaire chess thing where you had to guess each move and you'd get points, and I think you could then sort of translate it into an ELO scale, which is probably fairly meaningless and just for gamification, but it's probably a good source of material for, if you can find those. I think they were a column in Chess Magazine, and maybe he has them online now or something.
Right.
Do you
recall?
Also,
I don't. I mean, I'm familiar with the How Good Is Your Chess series, but also Pandolfini had that series for Chess Life magazine where the archive is available for free online. So I don't remember exactly how much he explains each move, but I'll link to it, and listeners can check it out and see if it is or is not useful. I
have never been able to bring myself to do the solitaire chess thing, but maybe I should try, since apparently it keeps Kaidanov at the level of 2600 or whatever at his age. So, okay, the next question is from frequent questioner and occasional guest Han Shoot, who crushed me in a chess.com blitz game years ago that I still remember. And he has a 3-part question broken down into 2 subparts. In fact, he has the boomer question, which is a 2-part question. What are 3 scientifically proven ways to improve as an adult in chess? And what are 3 ways to improve that you believe work but are not scientifically proven? And I don't know whether there are 3 scientifically proven or unproven ways, but give some, give however many you want to in response to this. That's the first part of his question. So don't worry. There's more.
Yeah, I'll start with that one. Yeah. And I will only do 2. And I will say, I mean, this is touched upon in my book, but certainly not, scientific research is not like the primary topic of my book. But I did come up with some answers for Han. I mean, number 1, and again, Chris, this is more in your wheelhouse than mine, but this came up in my interview with Dr. de Bruin, the concept of elaboration, which is the process of new material, giving it meaning by expressing it in your own words. And as we discussed, I mean, obviously this is a concept from outside, well beyond the chess domain, but Dr. de Bruin actually did research teaching chess to newer players, teaching them the rook and king checkmate in particular. And she actually did have a control group, a group who explain their thought process as they learned it, in a group that didn't, and those that explain their thought process learn more. So to me, the obvious corollary is, the art of explaining your thought processes within games. So that's one that it's sort of like, it's obviously received wisdom in the chess world, but upon digging deeper into this topic, I felt like it was on pretty firm scientific footing. Before I go to number 2, anything to add to that or dispute with that, Chris?
No, I think that was a great point that she made, and I had not really thought about it that much myself. I think it also relates to, sort of a mistake a lot of people make, which is they learn stuff in Chessable, let's say, or some other, similar method, but you get into the habit of just sort of learning what the move is, automatically associated with the position, and you forget to think about why is that the right move. And that can be, I think, even more important in courses and training that doesn't have to do with the opening, because in the opening, often it's okay to just make a certain set of moves in order, to get to the position you're looking for. I know that sounds like heresy, but maybe once you're a stronger player, it's okay to think that way sometimes. But, if you're trying to learn endgames or tactical patterns or something like that, you don't want to learn the concept just with the position that's in the example, right? You want to think about why is this the right move here? Well, it's because the rook needs to cut off the king, or something like that. Not just, I put the rook on the square, but I put the rook on the square to cut off the king or something, if you're doing, a rook endgame example.
Yeah, and that's definitely a recurring note that I hit in the book, because it's something that, it's been advised a few times memorably on the podcast, but it's also something I experience, and I experience the push and pull where I kind of want to just, mindlessly repeat the move, but I have to remind myself that, and I've experienced, as I write in the book, I've experienced the feeling of you're at the board and, suddenly you realize that you don't know why the moves are made. You only think about it when you're playing a game that means a lot more to you.
Yeah. Well, that's why playing is the best. Is the best training,
exactly.
Right? Well, An also said, what are ways to improve in chess that you believe work but are not scientifically proven?
Okay, well, first I'll give one more for his his that is scientifically proven. Luckily, I prepared for this question because spitballing would have been too hard, Han. You ask hard questions, but for this one, the interleaving basically, and this actually is something I closed the book with, a quote from Jakob Aagaard about the importance of daily practice, even if it's a tiny bit each day. But correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but the concept of interleaving basically means like studying different aspects, like breaking up what you study across topics so that you're not just studying one thing and you're not just doing huge batches of time of one thing and then expecting to remember it 2 weeks later, but forcing yourself to sort of recall things and be exposed to them repeatedly over time, even if they're for much shorter duration. And that's, again, something that sort of anecdotally I had experienced as well. How did I do explaining that?
No, I think that's, I agree. That's a very scientifically valid thing. A lot of this stuff from the science of memory goes back like 150 years almost, so it's not something that just came out in some article yesterday or something like that. And by the way, that's another reason why playing is so good, because when you're playing, you have to do all the stuff. You've got to do the opening, you've got to do the middle game, sometimes the end game, you've got to do calculation, you've got to recognize tactical patterns. It's all in a 4-hour game. So that is, in a sense, interleaved practice all by itself.
Yeah, for sure. Although playing, to your question of things that are unproven, I did reluctantly have to say it's tournament chess. I mean, I feel like we're pretty sure it's one of the best ways to get better at chess. Certainly everyone who's become great at chess played a lot of tournaments, but we don't have actual science, though, like drawing from something outside of it. I mean, there's the idea of like the testing effect. I guess there are some similar things, but they're not exactly the same.
Well, sometimes in science, people talk about how you don't need to run a randomized experiment to prove that parachutes are good for saving your life when you jump out of planes, right? So maybe we can say that by lack of counterexample, that is, aside from maybe one or two stories in world history, which we don't really understand that well, nobody just suddenly emerged as a 2,500 player, without playing, without playing tournament chess. Whereas even Magnus Carlsen played hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of games, before he became a master, a grandmaster, and all of that. He packed it into a shorter period of time, but he was playing like over and over again during that time and coming back for a lesson like once a month or something like that, So, not scientific, but probably a good weight of the evidence. Okay, so I'm going to save I'm going to save 1B from Han for the end, because it pairs well with the final question. But Han's question 2 is the Gen Z question, which is, can you give a 1-minute TikTok pitch of your book? And I have personally heard that TikTok sells books. So let's go.
Well, God help me. I'm the worst TikToker in the world. I'm way too old for it. So I've tried to make a channel. I do have someone helping me with video clips, but I just, I always feel like there's this famous movie scene with Steve Buscemi in Adam Sandler movie where he's pretending to be in high school, and it's like, "Hello, fellow kids." whenever I log on to TikTok, I feel like I'm that guy. So to the extent that I could.
Make sure your TikTok appeal includes manifesting and all kinds of other things like that, that everybody on TikTok talks about.
So to the extent that I could make a TikTok appeal, I would just tell them, look, it's it's 500 hours of podcast of chess conversation condensed into, I read the audiobook, so it's about an 8-hour read. I mean, it's like, which in the grants, and as you said, since there's no chess in it, 8 hours is really 8 hours. So in the grand scheme of chess things, I mean, it might even, I think a lot of people could read it less, but because I kept having to repeat stuff. So in the grand scheme of studying and learning about chess, to be able to, read it in your bed without a chessboard in 6 hours and get all these insights from, dozens and dozens of top players and trainers and accomplished amateurs. Pretty good ROI, I'd say.
Well, TikTokers, don't fret. I don't think it's actually going to be an 8-hour long audiobook. That might be too long for TikTokers. It feels to me more like 6 hours, maybe. And also,
like I said, a lot of edits. So.
And it goes really fast. Like, it's not like reading or listening to a textbook. Like, it's listening to someone talk, and with a lot of interesting characters that come along, along the way. So final question. So Han asked, how do you reflect on your own chess development given all the knowledge from your book? And Neil Bruce put it even more precisely. Which piece of advice from your book do you think will be most helpful for your own chess game?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to the importance of competing, not breaking any news here, but that's certainly, and I know, Chris, you and I see eye to eye on that, but that's sort of like, to the extent that a lot of my improvement, and I talked about this a bit with Davern in the prior podcast, it comes down to decision making, and there's no better practice for that than actually putting yourself in the situation and having to do having to make those decisions. So, I mean, when you do ask trainers for advice, often the first thing they'll say is solve puzzles. But I'm from a generation, I'm old enough to remember that developing chess players in the 1980s and the 1990s, sure, a lot of them solved puzzles, but that was not the primary way. I mean, they were reading books, they were playing lots of tournaments, but there wasn't this gamified obsession with tactics. And it might work. I mean, certainly we look at whatever it is that the younger generation is doing, whatever that sort of stew is. And, I cite some anecdotes and stuff within the book. I mean, certainly a lot of it is playing online, but we don't know to what extent it is that they're solving tactics. But I mean, I will say the number one conclusion is the importance of playing important games, not just like futzing around on your phone, and, extracting lessons from those games.
So Neil specifically said, which will be most helpful for your own game? So does that mean you're going to put this advice into practice more in your own game? And now that the book is done, you're going to be out there over the board more often?
Well, I'm helped a lot because I actually said somewhere in the book where I'm talking about the importance of tournament play, I concede, like, look, I know it's really hard to make it to tournaments. Like, a lot of people, they're like, I get it that if I wanted to get better, I would be going to tournaments. But like, you might have a job, you might have a family, you might live in a rural area, you might be income constrained. There's tons of reasons that it's like terrible, it could be argued as a terrible use of your time. So I say somewhere in the book, like, if, I'm a big fan of league games and setups like that, where you can play on one weeknight, or even if it's once a month, it's a lot better than nothing in many cases where you're preparing. But the idea of like being able to play a regular game where it doesn't necessarily take over your life. So I say in the book that if I had something like that available, that would be the way that I would go. And happy to report that I recently found out, shout out to the Chaturanga Chess Club, that it's much closer to my house than I thought. It's only a 30-minute drive. So I'm actually able to play league games, and it gives me hope for the future that I can play in a way that is not too disruptive to my life. But for a long time, I didn't think I was in that situation. And I know that a lot of people are not in a situation where they can compete regularly in a way that's not really disruptive to their lives.
Well, that chess club is like the ruby slippers. Like, you had the power all along, but you didn't realize that how easy it was
right.
to use it. Well, if you played one league game a week, that would be 50 games a year approximately, which is a high volume for a lot of people who are older than, college age. So I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. Congratulations on the book. And any last thoughts?
Well, just want to thank you for reading it and, all you've contributed to the podcast. Obviously, it's, so many free book reviews that you've devoted tons of hours to. And obviously, you're one of the most quoted people in the book for a reason. So, yeah, just thank you for reading it and everything else, Chris.
Well, you're welcome. Congratulations again.
Oh, thanks. And if there's anything I forgot, it's going to be in the show notes. The show notes are going to be long, listeners. So take a look if there's anything book related that I need to add. But thanks for listening. Yep. And we will catch you all next week.